what should be an interesting one-hour conversation here about the issues that matter to Sacramento and, of course, the nation, a debate between the two candidates in California's 7th Congressional District. I'm John Myers, the political editor at News 10 and the moderator of this debate, co-sponsored by the Sacramento Bee and Capital Public Radio. Now, before we begin, let's take a quick look at the candidates in this race, Republican incumbent Dan Lungren and Democrat Bera. This race is in what used to be California's 3rd Congressional District, redrawn by the state's Independent Citizens Panel into a much more compact 7th District solely in Sacramento County. But what hasn't changed are the two men who want to represent it. Gold River Republican Dan Lungren has represented this region in Congress since 2005. He represented Long Beach in Congress in the 1980s and served 8 years as California's Attorney General. Elk Grove Democrat Bera has never held political office. He's a physician who served as Sacramento County's Chief Medical Officer and is Professor of Medicine at UC Davis. These two men squared off in 2010 with Dan Lungren winning by 7 points. But there were 5 people on that ballot. This year, under the state's new election laws, there are only 2, and the race is one of the most closely watched in the nation. And we are joined here in the studio by the candidates in the 7th Congressional race, Republican incumbent Dan Lungren, Democratic challenger Bera. Gentlemen, thanks again for being here with us today.
Thank you for doing this.
I also want to introduce my colleagues here from the other news organizations sponsoring this debate who are here at the table with me. Dan Smith, the Capitol Bureau Chief of the Sacramento Bee. Marianne Russ, Senior Reporter and Anchor at Capital Public Radio. We, of course, are also joined by a small studio audience here at News 10. And as you might guess, I'm asking these folks if they will keep their reactions to themselves as we do this hour-long program. They're, of course, welcome to offer applause at the end, but otherwise it is all about the guys at the podiums. Now, here are the ground rules for this debate that were agreed to by both Congressman Lungren and Dr. Bera. Each candidate will give an opening statement of no more than 90 seconds. Each candidate will also have a closing statement at the end of this debate. The candidates will have 90 seconds to answer their questions. Their opponents will then have no more than 60 seconds for a rebuttal. We will try to keep them to time, and I'm sure that will work out well. Where are the questions coming from today? Well, most of them are from myself and the fellow journalists here at the table. The candidates have not seen these questions in advance. Some of the questions today are coming from the people of the 7th Congressional District, which were submitted via social media to each news organization. Now, roughly at the midway point of this debate, each candidate is going to have the chance to ask their opponent a question of his own choosing. The order of the opening of the closing statements and opening statements, rather, was determined the old-fashioned way by a coin toss, and Dan Lungren won that toss, and he chose to deliver the final closing statement in this program. So we will begin with the opening statements, and Dr. Bera begins that. Dr. Bera, your opening statement.
Great. I want to thank the moderators for putting this on. I want to thank those watching on television as well as those listening on the broadcast. Thank you for joining us today. And Congressman, I want to thank you for joining me for this debate. I believe in America because I believe in the American dream. I'm a product of that American dream. My parents came here in the 1950s with little more than that dream. I've been married for 21 years to my wife, Janine. She's put up with me for that long. We've lived most of our adult life here in Elk Grove. And, that's where we've raised our daughter. And this is a great community. And what we've seen over that time is things have been changing a little bit. Things have been drifting. She's a doctor. We've both been working in the clinics, volunteering in the free clinics around this community. And life's gotten hard for folks. 3 weeks ago, we were working in one of the free clinics, and we noticed every patient that we had seen was someone who had been laid off. These were middle-class folks. These were folks that were looking for work, and they were struggling to get the necessary care. And that's where Congress has failed us. They've failed to create enough jobs to get this community working again. They've failed to relieve the middle class. Now, I believe in the American dream, and I'm running for Congress because we have to make sure every child in this country has access to that dream the same way I did.
Dr. Bera, thank you. Congressman Lungren, your opening statement, sir.
Thank you very much. On 9/11, I happened to be in Washington, D.C. Passed over the 14th Street Bridge about an hour and a half before it was hit by, the Pentagon was hit on the other side of the 14th Street Bridge by those who would attack us in our country. I lost a friend that day on that plane. I lost a law partner that day. And one of the young men who had grown up with my children went to the school with them, as did his siblings, and their family went to church with us, who was lost in one of the Twin Towers. We believe that he got hit directly. That changed my life. It changed America forever, but I vowed that if I had the opportunity to go back into public service, I would, so that I could use the experience that I had as Attorney General and formerly as a member of Congress to do what was necessary to try and ensure that those who would attack us would not succeed, and that we could use the tools that were necessary to protect us, and at the very same time, not allow them to defeat us by having us give up our civil liberties. I've been doing that every day since. I work on the issue of jobs, I work on the issue of taxes, I work on the issue of spending. But the reason I went back to Congress and the reason I hope to stay in Congress is to continue to work to protect the American people against those who would destroy our way of life. And believe me, they are still there.
Congressman, thank you. And again, let's begin the questions here. A reminder to both candidates that the rules that have been agreed to in this debate, 90 seconds for each answer, 60 seconds for the rebuttal. The first question comes from Marianne Russ of Capital Public Radio.
Dr. Bera, this one's for you. Just today, Comcast announced hundreds of job cuts in our area. You talked about jobs in your opening statement. You said that Congress has failed to create enough jobs. When we solicited questions from listeners and viewers and readers, the overriding issue was job creation, but people made it clear they want you to be very specific. So can you give us some concrete examples of how you create jobs in Sacramento County?
Absolutely. There's no greater issue than in our region. We're facing the fourth year of close to 11% unemployment rate. We just found out Comcast is going to move over 300 jobs. Vision Services Plan is threatening to move jobs because of the decision by the Health Insurance Exchange. We lost our only Fortune 500 company in Waste Connections. We have to stop losing businesses, and we have to bring businesses to this region. And we can do that if we're smart. Here's how we do it. One, when I talk to small business owners, they're ready to start hiring again. The one problem they have is getting access to loans. Let's get the banks lending. Number two, we need a tax policy that rewards companies that build here, not only in Sacramento, but in America. We need to close those tax loopholes that allow companies to ship jobs overseas. Let's build in America. Number three, let's pass an infrastructure bill. Here at home, we've got levees that need lots of work. We have thousands of construction workers that are out of work. If we could pass an infrastructure bill, if Congress could pass that bill, we could put people to work immediately. That's how we start building jobs. Number four, I'm a product of our public schools. I'm a product of our education. An investment in education long-term is an investment in jobs. Our kids have to be able to compete in the 21st century. So this is about building jobs here. This is about bringing those companies here and building on the assets that we have in this region. So we can do it, but we've got to get to the work of doing it.
Dan Lungren, 60 seconds about jobs here and how do you being specific about those jobs?
Well, first of all, Congress doesn't create jobs. Congress can either inhibit or promote an environment in which jobs are created in the private sector, predominantly with small business. So I've spent a good deal of time going around talking to small business people in this district. One of the things they find of great uncertainty is the rash of lawsuits they receive under ADA. I have the bill that would change that, not to undercut ADA, but to get it serving its actual purpose, which is access as opposed to litigation. Secondly, if you speak to small business people in this district, you will find that they are talking about the uncertainty that's created by taxes coming forward on January 1st. I have supported not allowing those taxes to go up. My opponent has opposed that. Just a year and a half ago, when President Obama said that we ought to extend those tax cuts, he opposed it. I supported it at that time. We need to do it once again. Regulatory reform. I have had a number of bills for which I have voted, approximately 20 so far this year, that have gone to the Senate. We need the Senate to act, and act now.
Congressman, the second question in this debate comes from me, and it is for you. Your party's candidate for president, Governor Mitt Romney, has been trying to explain a lot lately what he meant at a Florida fundraiser when he said there are 47% of Americans, and I quote him, dependent upon government, believe that they are victims, who believe the government has a responsibility to care for them, who believe that they are entitled to health care, food, housing. Is that how you see the country? And if it's not, can you tell me where you're different from Governor Romney?
Oh, sure. I think he made a major mistake in calling people victims, saying that they want to be victims. I do think he pointed out that there are approximately 47, 49% of the people who don't pay income tax at the present time. But there are different categories of folks. Some don't because they're retired. They paid all their lives. I wouldn't call them trying to be victimized. Others because they have a low income. Don't qualify for paying taxes on the federal level. What I have supported all along is tax reform that will require more people who are working and making real money to pay taxes. Our tax system is just rife with all sorts of exceptions, sometimes called loopholes. I have supported legislation, voted for legislation on the floor. In fact, the budget for which I voted this last year specifically talks about tax reform, which would expand the tax base, eliminating many of those loopholes and requiring both businesses and high-income individuals to pay their fair share. The problem is we need more taxpayers, not more taxes. That's how you're going to increase the ability of the government to function within its own revenues. And of course, the other thing we need to do, we need to attack the spending that is out of control on the federal level.
You need more taxpayers. Does that mean you would raise taxes on some people?
No, I need more people that have jobs. I need more people who are at higher income to actually pay their taxes and not utilize attorneys and accountants to get out of paying it. We don't need to have these high tax rates if we, in fact, would eliminate many of those exceptions which allow people not to pay taxes.
Dr. Bera, your thoughts?
Yeah, Americans don't look at themselves as victims, and 47% of Americans are not victims. They're folks that have worked their whole life, saved into Medicare, saved into Social Security. They're folks that are out there looking for jobs right now. The folks that I was talking about that I've seen in the clinics a few weeks ago, these are folks that want to get back to work. These are folks that are looking to care for themselves. They don't want a handout. I agree with the Congressman. The way we address this is we actually broaden the tax base, but the way you broaden the tax base is you give people jobs, so they're part of the system. That is how we've always functioned as a society. When I talk about the American dream, it is giving people those opportunities, so when they work hard, they play by the rules, they can climb one or two rungs on the ladder and leave their kids better off. Now, we've got to honor the promises that we've also made to our parents and grandparents. They've worked their whole lives. They need to get the health care that they need to get the Medicare that they need, and we need a solvent Social Security system.
And onward now in this debate for the 7th Congressional District, Dan Smith from the Sacramento Bee for Dr. Bera.
Dr. Bera, Republicans in this district and in other districts actually are running TV ads hammering you and other Democrats for supporting the president's health care overhaul, specifically what they say is a dangerous cut to Medicare, more than $700 billion reduction over time by lowering payments to providers in the Medicare Advantage program. Do you support that aspect of the health care overhaul? And if so, what do you say to seniors in the 7th District who are worried about their health care?
Well, the Congressman and his supporters have been going around saying Democrats want to cut over $700 billion out of Medicare. Now, Congressman, you know that's not true. In fact, you voted for the same thing yourself twice. That $700 billion never leaves Medicare. It stays there in the trust fund, and it extends the life of Medicare. The Sacramento Bees looked at this and said that was entirely false. You know, Congressman, you know the truth. You voted for that same legislation twice. We have to get serious about Medicare, and this is what I tell my seniors in this district. As a doctor, I've sat with folks where they've had to decide between one medication and another when they needed both and they couldn't afford both. We have to secure Medicare, and we have to do it in a smart way. 1, let's get rid of fraud and abuse. 2, let's negotiate on a fair playing field. Let's make this about patients, not the health insurance industry. 3, let's practice prevention. Let's prevent the heart attack. Let's diagnose the cancer early so we can save the life. That's not only good medicine, that is going to save lives, and it's going to cut costs. 4, let's cut bureaucracy. Let's make healthcare and Medicare about taking care of patients. Those costs are not cuts in benefits. Those are cuts in costs and payments to health insurance companies. And Congressman, you know better than that because you voted for the same thing twice.
Dr. Bera, just because you say something is true doesn't make it true. Look at the chief auditor for the Medicare system when appearing before the House Budget Committee asked whether or not there are cuts in the president's Obamacare. They said yes. They also admitted that they're counted twice. Once supposedly to help the survivability of the trust fund, and once again to pay for the additional programs under Medicare. You can't double count even if you're a doctor. The fact of the matter is, it takes it out of Medicare. It specifically takes it out of Medicare Advantage. And in this district, the 7th District, we have one of the highest percentages of senior citizens who have opted in for Medicare Advantage in the entire country. And under the formula that is contained in the program that he supports, the seniors in this district will suffer larger cuts for their services than those in Florida. A perverse nonsense as a result of the fact that we actually have lower cost per patient than they do in Florida. So in fact, Doctor, I did vote for it. I'm proud I voted for it. And look at the testimony under oath before the committees of Congress, which state that you are absolutely wrong in what you just said.
I'm glad he admitted he voted for it.
Well, Doctor, and that there we have some consensus here apparently on the panel. But this is such a salient issue. Just very briefly, Congressman, the Republican plan also targets that same amount of money in some ways. I mean, that's one of the problems we have in this political campaign. We're talking over the same pot of money.
We're not talking over the same pot of money.
Why not?
In that it stays, any cuts stay within the Medicare system under the Republican plan, under the Democratic plan as proposed by the President, as admitted under oath in testimony before the Congress. They take that money out, do not keep it in the Medicare program, but use it for new programs established under the President's program. So it actually endangers Medicare. It doesn't leave that money for that purpose. I mean, that's the testimony before the Congress under oath, and you can say it's not true, but go check the testimony. We'll be happy to make that available.
I admit I've broken the format, Dr. Bera. Do you want to say briefly before we move on?
Absolutely. I think the bigger question is, let's look at the plan for Medicare that the Congressman supports. He supports a budget that would privatize Medicare, that would make it a voucher program, that would leave seniors without necessary care, breaking a promise that we've made over a generation to our parents and grandparents and seniors. It would privatize it, and it would add thousands of dollars of costs to Medicare.
We may talk about this some more.
If I could specifically respond to that.
Well, we could specifically go back and forth all afternoon.
It's a pretty important issue. In fact, it's not a voucher. It is a premium support program. It was first presented as a bipartisan proposal under the Clinton administration commission. That is not a voucher. It is a premium support program, and it is patterned after the health care plan that is available for millions of Americans who happen to be federal employees.
We can call it what it wants. It doesn't cover the cost of care that seniors need. And as a doctor, we've got to put our patients first.
Something tells me we won't agree on this one, in which case the voters will get a chance to hear from both of you on this. Well, let me go to a couple of questions that have been submitted from the community, from the 7th Congressional District. The first one is from the Sacramento Bee. Dan Smith?
This is for you, Congressman Lungren, and it came from Johanna Jensen of Rancho Cordova. Here's her question. Global warming, is this an issue that concerns you? Why? And what steps will you take to minimize potential impacts to the country and your district in particular? And as impact, she means water supply, flooding, greater fire danger, drought.
There's no doubt there is global change or climate change. The question is who causes it, and is it caused predominantly by human activity? It seems to me we ought to take reasonable steps, but not steps that so put us in a disadvantageous position economically that we will have less jobs. There are those who cry about their concern for jobs, but then support the very things that would absolutely destroy jobs. We have an example of that in the current administration that I believe is supported by my opponent, to try and basically ruin the coal industry in the United States, losing us tens of thousands of jobs instead of pursuing the cleanest technology in the area of coal. Look, my record's pretty good. I happen to be chairman of House Administration. We got rid of the program the former speaker had of composting that gave us the savings of equivalent of carbon emission of 1 car per year. We just have the results in on the program that I established in the Congress, which is waste to energy. It produces enough energy to light 250 homes per year. It reduces that which would go to landfill by 5,000 tons, and the number of car equivalents it takes off the street, essentially, in terms of carbon emission, is almost 900. That's a pretty good record in just 1 year.
I just want to follow up real quickly. So you're suggesting that the global warming change that we're seeing may not be caused by man-made sources?
No, my suggestion is we don't know to what extent it is and to what extent palliative moves that we would take on our own in the United States will have an effect. At the same time, I believe it makes good common sense for us to attempt to try and reduce carbon emissions where possible, as I've done with the U.S. Capitol.
Let's hold it there. Dr. Bera, you want to talk about climate change briefly?
Talk to a farmer in the Midwest right now. The climate is changing. We're seeing extremes happen. Talk to folks living in New Orleans. We've seen these rapid extremes. We can go about this in a smart way, though, in a way that creates jobs. We should never doubt America's ingenuity when we put our mind to something. There's no reason we can't move forward and become an energy independent country. That is what we need to do, because this is a national security issue as well. We need to start moving off of the dependence on foreign oil. We need to start producing our own energy at home and putting folks to work. Now, the original question was, how does this affect us at home? It affects us dramatically. We depend on our agricultural sector here in California, and we've gone through drastic droughts. So as the climate has been changing, our snowpack's melting. That's our biggest reservoir. So we've got to address this. And we can debate what causes it and what the human impact is. But the fact of the matter is, the longer we wait, the worse it's getting.
Another question here from the community from Marianne Russ, Capital Public Radio, for Dr. Bera.
Dr. Bera, this one comes to us from Sue Bassett of Citrus Heights. She asks, how do you or would you propose to work across the aisle to prevent or ameliorate the disastrous sequestration that could send this country over the fiscal cliff? Tell us the single most important way you personally will work towards common sense compromise.
Sue, the first thing we need to do is actually roll up our sleeves and take these issues seriously. I mean, this Congress has a fiscal cliff hanging over its head, and they chose to go on recess for 7 weeks. That is unconscionable. We have to learn how to set aside political differences. We have to find common ground. As Democrats and Republicans, we have a lot more in common than we have that separates us. We all want a strong country. We all want our kids to succeed. But right now, it's the political parties that are getting in the way. Ronald Reagan could work with a Tip O'Neill. Bill Clinton could work with a Newt Gingrich. We have to get back to that context where it's not about political party, but it's about taking care of people and moving forward. So here's how we do that. Leadership is not about blame and saying, well, it's the Senate's fault, or it's the House's fault, or it's the President's fault. Leadership is about rolling up your sleeves, locking yourself in a room, and leading by example. Congress has not been able to come up with a budget in over 2,000 days. That's ridiculous. That's where this has to start. Let's come up with a budget. There's legislation that's bipartisan, the no budget, no pay legislation that says if Congress doesn't do its job and pass a responsible budget, they don't get paid. That is a step in the right direction. My pledge is I will co-sponsor that legislation, which is bipartisan, that holds Congress accountable to doing absolutely what their core job is, which is passing a budget, and they haven't done it in over 2,000 days. Start there. Pass the no budget, no pay legislation, Congress.
Dr. Bera, you're being critical of the current Congress, but the question is about compromise, so give us another issue that you would be willing to compromise on.
I think there are many of us that think No Child Left Behind is going in the wrong direction. I'll stand against my own party and the president. I don't think race to the top is the right direction we need for education. So we can find those issues where I'm willing to stand against my party. We're willing to work together.
Yeah, Congressman, let's go back to your rebuttal here. Can you work with Democrats on the sequestration if you return to Washington?
Well, I have worked with Democrats my entire life. All you have to do is look at my record, whether it's immigration, whether it's criminal justice, whether it's things like gun laws. I have worked across the aisle. As a matter of fact, if you'll check with members on the other side of the aisle, one of the first things they do is come to me to see if we can get some support. Ron Wyden came to me before he came to Vice Presidential nominee Ryan in terms of his approach. Unfortunately, I was totally involved on some issues dealing with anti-terrorism, so I couldn't work on that specific one. But if you will look at my record, I probably have as many pieces of legislation that are bipartisan as any member of Congress at the present time. And on the idea of no budget, no pay, how about no budget, no job? I voted for a budget. I have worked hard. I put my budget on the line. I haven't seen any budget that you put on the line, and I don't know if you're arguing that Dianne Feinstein ought not to have a job this year, or you're campaigning against her because she hasn't voted for a budget in the last 2,000 days. Let's just look at our records.
Did you vote for the budgets during the Democratic reign in the House?
I voted for the alternatives at that time, yes.
Let's go back to the journalist questions. This one is for Dan Lungren from Marianne Russ.
Okay, let's go back to health care, a little bit more specifically, the Affordable Care Act, which you support, the repeal. California and a lot of other states are already moving forward with many of the provisions, as you know, including the health benefit exchange, the online insurance marketplace. So how should the government handle states like California who are moving this direction, getting people lined up for instance, the Medicaid expansion, with the expectation that the money is going to be there?
Well, I think what we ought to do is be very honest with people. We can't afford Obamacare. It's going to put us several $1 trillion above debt that we already have. It's going to bury us in debt. It is not work. When you have to have as many exemptions that were given as were originally given in the thousands to certain employers because it wouldn't work, it might suggest to you maybe this doesn't make sense. When you have testimony before the relevant committees of Congress that in fact what is projected to be provided to providers, not insurance carriers, providers, will actually reach a cliff so that you will have a diminution, that is a lessening of the number of doctors, the number of hospitals, the number of medical systems that can treat people. So what I have suggested is that we not only repeal Obamacare, but we replace it with a number of things. For instance, I co-sponsored H.R. 6283 with Dr. Burgess from Texas, a practicing physician. That would give incentives for states to create high-risk pools to make sure that no one is denied access to quality care. I have worked on a number of other different approaches, allowing people to purchase insurance across the state lines, which will increase tremendously the number of opportunities and the varieties of coverage that is out there. And if you look at what's contained in our budget with respect to the actual reform of the system, you will see people can stay in what they have now or have greater choices down the line with an element of competition that will help drive costs down.
Okay, Dr. Bera, if I can, just I think what I think the best thing for the audience here is to tell us what's wrong with the Republican plan from your eyes. The congressman has laid out a case for why he thinks that alternative to the president's health care. 60 seconds.
And I would say I've been consistent that the Affordable Care Act is not the direction I would have gone. It doesn't address the cost of care. So as a physician, as someone who's dealt with these issues over my whole adult life and professional life, we've got to address the cost of care, but the only way you do that is by taking on the health insurance industry, by taking on the pharmaceutical industry, and making care about patients. So their plan doesn't do that. Their plan continues to allow health insurance companies to make those decisions. We've got to take healthcare and put it in the hands of our patients. That's the direction that we need to go. You know, he touched on any number of issues. There's no way for us to get our economy going until we've addressed the cost of healthcare. When I talk to small business owners, when I talk to large corporations, after payroll, their second biggest item is the cost of benefits. For us to compete in a global marketplace, we have to get a handle on the cost of care and start lowering that. And that has to be priority number one. And again, that's why I disagreed with the president's approach. He should have made the economic case for why we have to get a handle on healthcare costs.
Well, something you want to get a handle on that I've talked about, which comes to the next question in this debate, is for you, Dr. Bera. You've talked about wasteful spending in Washington. You've issued statements about that tonight in this debate. You've talked about loopholes. Those are a bit of difficult things to define for some people. Give me one example, if you could, Dr. Bera, of wasteful spending and a loophole.
Well, and let's broaden that to the debt.
Let's try those first two.
Okay, so wasteful spending is the 30 cents on every healthcare dollar that goes to the health insurance industry that has nothing to do with patient care. That's wasteful spending. Wasteful spending is the fact that the federal government is prohibited from negotiating on pharmaceutical pricing. The Bush drug benefit prohibits us to negotiate for best price. That is an $800 billion giveaway to the pharmaceutical industry over 10 years. That's wasteful spending.
And how about a loophole? I'll get to that since we got a moment.
A loophole allows companies to ship jobs overseas. You know, it's not fair trade. So it is moving jobs overseas and leaving dollars over there, as opposed to closing a loophole that allows us to incent those companies that build jobs here in America.
I've heard in this debate both of you use that term loophole. Congressman Lungren, let me give you the chance in the rebuttal. What's a loophole to you, sir?
Well, I'll answer what a loophole is, and I'll also give you an example of waste. Waste, I would say, is Cylinder, the kind of program that my opponent has supported in the past as a way for us to get out from under global warming. We ought to use our common sense when we look at these programs instead of throwing money to the wind. A loophole, corn ethanol. It's been the largest boondoggle that I have seen since I've been in Congress. We've finally gotten rid of the subsidy, but there's still a tariff on those ethanol that is made from other sources coming into the United States. That is, in my judgment, not only an improper loophole, it also happens to be immoral because it has as a direct impact on a particular foodstuff that is utilized as a staple in diets around the world. I can't see why. There's no common sense to it. It doesn't make sense from a standpoint of the taxpayer, and it frankly is immoral with respect to the food available to people around the world.
Let's move to our next question for Congressman Lungren from Dan Smith from the Sacramento Bee.
Congressman, Iran says that they are not developing a nuclear bomb, but reports as recently as last month show that they are stepping up their nuclear enrichment activities. Just today, President Obama told the UN that the Iran situation is not a challenge that can be contained. So tell me, at what point is military involvement necessary? What is our line in the sand?
Well, the fact of the matter is Iran is developing a nuclear capability, and I can say that without talking about any classified information whatsoever. The fact is that's happening. Our intelligence, Israeli intelligence, do not differ, in my judgment, at least on the surface. And the question is, how do you analyze that? And I think we analyze it in similar ways, but the next question is, where do you draw the line? I think Israel is trying to tell us we need to draw the line now. I support drawing the line now. It is totally unacceptable for Iran to have a nuclear weapon. But you have to look at what the administration has done. This president has pointed to the failings of Israel before he points to the failings of the countries around that would basically threaten him. One of the worst things you can possibly do in the Middle East is to show weakness, to show some divide between your country and your strongest ally. That's what this administration has done, unfortunately. We are now on the brink of a decision that has to be made. It is unacceptable. When we say it is unacceptable, we must have all options to stop Iranian development of a nuclear weapon. Some will say that might get us into a conflict. We will be in a conflict one way or the other, and if they have a nuclear weapon, the consequences will be devastating, not only for Israel, for the entire Middle East, but for the entire country.
Dr. Bera, the congressman has said the president has been weak on Iran.
Yeah, I think the president has used diplomacy, but diplomacy without the threat of military intervention is not real diplomacy. And Iran has to know that we will never let them acquire nuclear weapons. I'd stand with the congressman, and I agree with him on this. That would destabilize the region. That would put Israel, one of our closest allies, in harm's way, and we have to stand with Israel. The greatest threat is to destabilization in the Middle East is a nuclear-armed Iran. We can't let that happen. But again, we've got to let our diplomacy work. It has to be diplomacy with meaningful and an understanding to Ahmadinejad that we will invade if we have to.
We are now at the point in this debate for the 7th Congressional District where each candidate is going to get to ask the other candidate a question. These are consistent with the rules that we agreed to in the order we're going. So, Dr. Army Bera, you're up first to get to ask a question to the man you'd like to replace, Congressman Lungren.
Thank you. Congressman, a few weeks ago, recently, you sent out a taxpayer-funded mailer that says you would lead by example on the issue of the national debt. Now, leading by example, which one of your 2 taxpayer-funded pensions would you be willing to give up to help us pay off the debt?
Well, I would have expected a question like that from you. I do not qualify for a pension so long as I remain in the Congress from the federal congressional. So if you're successful, I guess you would make me eligible for a pension, and I'm going to try very hard to make sure that does not occur. Secondly, I would just say this. I have worked as hard as any member of Congress on trying to control spending. I chair the committee that oversees the expenditures of the Congress, of the House of Representatives for 2 years. For 2 years, I've brought to the floor cuts to the Congress, cuts to my budget, the budget of every single member of Congress, cuts to the leadership budget, and that's not the easiest thing to do, tell the leadership they're going to spend less money, and cuts to every single committee. In the process, I cut my own committee more than I cut the other committees. If the whole federal government would have cut its budgets by between 11 and 12% that we have cut to the House of Representatives, we would be well on our way towards establishing a guide path towards a balanced budget. So look at my actions. My actions speak louder than the words.
Dr. Bera, you can get your 60 seconds.
Leadership is leading by example. Congressman, your actions, you're currently taking a full pension from the state of California of over $50,000 a year at a time where you're taking a full salary in Congress of over $175,000. We're going broke in the state. That is double dipping. You spiked your pension on your way out. That is exactly the wrong direction that we need to go in. We've got to get serious about these pensions. We have to get serious about leading by example and putting ourselves out there. That is why we've made the pledge that we've made. I'm not going to take a pay raise until unemployment has been addressed in this region. That is leading by example. I'm not going to take a pension until we've actually secured Medicare and Social Security for the next generation. How can we advocate cuts to seniors when we're not willing to tighten our belts ourselves as leaders? Congressman, you've proposed privatizing Social Security and giving it away to Wall Street. That is not the direction that we need to go in. We need to make decisions ourselves and tighten our belts as leaders.
That's time, Dr. Bera. Congressman, you get to ask him a question, but feel free to keep
Well, all I can say is, Doctor, you have just articulated a number of things that the Sacramento Bee have said are false in the last campaign and in this campaign. Evidently, you think it's appropriate to continue with falsehoods. Look, 4 years ago, a mutual friend of ours, Rick Fowler, was called by you to go to a luncheon so that you could announce to him that you were going to run, and you asked him to give me a message that you respected my service to the public, and that you were going to run a different campaign. You were not going to have any personal attack. You were going to talk only about the issues. Subsequent to that, I have received from you personal attack, questioning my integrity, questioning my honesty, questioning my sincerity, questioning my motivation. My question for you is this, Doctor. When you said that to Rick Fowler, and he's here to tell people that in fact you said that to him, were you telling the truth at that time? Or was it a cynical political ploy? Or, as some of your friends have told me, it was that you couldn't hold up under the pressure you received from the Washington establishment to run a campaign against someone personally instead of the issues?
This is about personal integrity. This is about stepping up and leading by example. This is about putting your community first. That's the oath I took as a doctor, and that is the promise I make as a congressman. So, Congressman, when we talk about leading by example, it is leading by example. It is by making the sacrifice so your community is better off. It is by going and working in a free clinic and volunteering. Congressman, when you take a full state of California pension, when you raise your salary by 25% in the last month as Attorney General, so you get an extra $11,000, that sends the wrong example. We have to address these issues. Our cities are going bankrupt. Our state's going bankrupt. When you double dip and take a full salary as a congressman and a pension for the state of California, that is exactly the wrong direction. We have to address these issues, and those are not personal attacks. Those are the facts. When it is a fact that you to the Sacramento Bee, have said you would privatize Social Security. We can fact check that. It is a fact that I'm glad you admitted that you voted for the same $716 billion that you're attacking me on. Those are facts.
Dr. Bera, that's time there on that rebuttal. I want to remind everyone that we'll have closing statements in a few minutes in this debate for the candidates in the 7th Congressional District. We still have more questions, of course, but a reminder that we'll be coming up on the hour there. But right now, we want to go back to the questions here from the panel. Marion Russ has a question for Congressman Lungren.
Let's follow up on the Social Security issue. Congressman, the trust fund will not have enough money to pay out its full benefits within a couple of decades under the current model. The Federal Commission urged several changes, including increasing the retirement age, raising the payroll tax. Do you support either of those? If not, what would you do?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me just say we just saw an example of how well Dr. Bera would work across the aisle with people, questioning their motivation, misstating the facts, continually misstating the facts that have been shown to be untrue by an analysis by the Sacramento Bee, does not bode well for someone who wants to work. Look, I was around the last time we had to face this head on. And at that time, I worked with those in the Congress, and we had the grand compromise of Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, which did increase incrementally the age of retirement and as the major factor in attempting to try and keep the Social Security system viable. That has actually worked for the last quarter of a century. The question is now, will we have the courage to reach across the aisle and talk about those things? It makes it very difficult when you are talking about those things to have your opponent and his supporters criticize you because you voted to raise Social Security age back in 1983. I thought that's what they talked about when, as Dr. Bera just talked about, the great times of Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan working together across the aisle. I worked across the aisle. We stabilized the Social Security system, and now Dr. Bera criticizes that. How does that get us anywhere closer to solving the problem? One of the things we have to do, though, is to ensure that those people who are 55 and under are not affected, as I've always said, it's going forward.
What about his accusations that you'd like to privatize Social Security?
That's absolutely untrue. I have supported programs to allow a portion of whatever you have to be, of whatever your particular account is, to be invested as you see fit. And here's the reason why. Everybody remembers when we talked about the lockbox. Al Gore said we need to have a lockbox to protect Social Security, but being raided by government in other places. This is the only way you protect it. You give someone an actual amount of money that they can invest as they wish. You can keep it in the government.
I need to step in so we can keep moving. Dr. Bera, 60 seconds, please.
Can you imagine what would have happened if folks had moved their money out of Social Security and into Wall Street in this recession? We would have had millions of seniors in poverty. Social Security is a sacred program. We've got to address it in the broader context of the debt. Here's the problem with the debt. We have to understand where the debt came from. It came from 2 wars that were unfunded. It came from tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires. It came from giveaways to Wall Street, giveaways to big oil companies, giveaways to health insurance companies. And Congressman, you voted for all 3 of those, and you're not done yet. You voted for a budget twice that is going to add over $3 trillion to our debt. That is ridiculous. Trusting Congressman Lungren on the debt to address these issues is like trusting a burglar to house it for you when you go on vacation.
Thank you, Dr. Bera. The next question, Dr. Bera, is for you, and it's for me. I want to talk about immigration for a moment. We haven't talked about that issue. It has come up in this campaign nationally and in this election year. As you know, President Barack Obama acted by executive order back in June to allow 1.7 million undocumented immigrants who came to the U.S. as children to stay if they meet certain conditions. Did the president do the right thing?
I would have supported the DREAM Act. These are kids that came here. This gives them a chance to become citizens in a country that they love by serving in the military, by going to college. Immigration, in the broader sense, though, is an issue of security. The first thing we have to do is we have to secure our borders. The next thing we have to do is we have to actually take the laws that we have and enforce those laws. Thirdly, we have to address immigration. As the son of parents that immigrated here in the 1950s, we want the best and brightest to come to this country. We want them to get their education, and then we want them to build their companies here, because that is an issue that moves our economy forward.
Should we keep all those people here in the United States, Dr. Bera, send some of them back?
We should have those that have successfully graduated from college. They can apply for an extension of their visas, and then over time they should be able to become citizens. So they can build their companies here. That is our history, and that is our legacy as Americans, and that has propelled our economy forward.
Congressman Lungren, briefly here, 60-second rebuttal. Did the president make the right decision? And if he did not, what would you have liked to see differently?
Well, I was the Republican floor manager of the last major reform of immigration, Simpson-Mazzoli. You have to be committed to it. We spent 30 days in a conference the Congress before, between the House and the Senate, every single day. That is, every single day the Congress was in session. We're unsuccessful, and I came back the next time, and we succeeded in doing it. Look, if this president had wanted to have major immigration reform, he could have done it. That's the disappointing thing. There were those of us willing to work with him on it. He never extended his hand. The idea of having the DREAM Act sitting out there, this thing that he did, 6 months or less than 6 months before the election, I mean, come on, that's pretty cynical. I support things like this last week where we voted to get rid of the diversity exception. That's a 55,000 visa program that was originally established by Tip O'Neill to help the Irish get in. It has nothing to do with skills people have. It is a violation of the worldwide quota system where we have people from all over the world coming. So yes, look, as the father-in-law of an immigrant from Africa.
But let me be fair, Congressman. Let me be fair. Would you send folks back who are here illegally, or would you do something different? I asked
Some I
the
would.
same thing.
Of course some I would. Those who just got their foot across the border yesterday, what right do they have to be in the United States? We have to establish a program in which we figure out those people who have some roots in the community. And you don't have to put them on a, quote, pathway to citizenship. I guarantee you that will be viewed as amnesty, and everybody understands if you cut in line, there's something wrong. I have had a program that I have proposed that would allow those who have roots in the community not to have the pathway to citizenship, but have what we call a blue card. So for a 5-year period of time, they'd be able to stay in the United States, but they would not be on the path of citizenship. They'd have to go home and sign off there, get behind the line like everybody else.
And I have to go next to Dan Smith. Dan Smith with a congressman question.
Congressman Lungren, you issued a statement denouncing a fellow House Republican's comments about, quote, legitimate rape.
Right.
But you did co-sponsor a bill with that House Republican that said only, quote, forcible rape pregnancies should be eligible for federally funded abortions. Do you then think that there are different kinds of rape? And the point here is, does that influence how you vote on whether federal funds can be used for abortion?
Well, the fact of the matter is, if you check the record, the word forcible was taken out of it. I was the one who went to the two major co-sponsors of that bill, Chris Smith of New Jersey and Congressman Pitts of Pennsylvania, and told them that I would not support that unless they took the word forcible out, because the language that they had in without forcible was the language that had prevailed for 30 years in the Congress, known as the Hyde Amendment. It had support in both Democratic and Republican administrations and had bipartisan support in the House and the Senate. It was the law. I told them, you should not change the language with one word, because that would change the state of the law. So in fact, if you're talking about the mistake they made, I was the one who pointed it out. I was the one, I assume maybe some others, but I can tell you it was after I went to them and told them I couldn't support it if they didn't take the word forcible out, that they changed it. So rather than changing the law, I worked to make sure that we maintained the law, that it stood the test of time in terms of what is known as the Hyde Amendment.
Dr. Bera, your rebuttal?
You know, rape is rape, and we don't need to debate what it is. What we do need to do, though, is make sure we protect individual liberties, that we protect a woman's right to choose. As a doctor, the oath I took was to sit there with my patients, to answer their questions, and then to empower them within their faith, their individual circumstances, and their family circumstances to make the decisions that best fit their life. This is about individual freedoms. As a doctor, I don't want the government coming into my exam room making those decisions for me. I want to empower my patients to make the decisions that best fit within their faith, their family circumstances, and their individual circumstances. And this is about the individual liberties and individual freedoms. We don't want the government in our exam room.
And on to another question here in the 7th District Congressional Debate. Marianne Russ for Dr. Bera.
Dr. Bera, despite some positive news, the struggling housing market continues to be a major drag on the Sacramento County economy and elsewhere, of course. In your opinion, what role should the federal government play in trying to change that? Do you support homebuyer tax credits and other incentives or not?
You know, so another area that I would criticize the president on is not addressing the housing crisis early enough, because it is a drag on our economy and we will not start to recover. So here's some things. As I'm out there talking to voters and talking to folks who live in this district, there are many of them that are trying to do the right thing. They're paying their mortgage, but their homes are now underwater. You know, they're not asking for principal debt forgiveness. What they want to do is sit with the banks, and now that interest rates have dropped, they actually would like to refinance their homes. The banks are not doing it. I do think it is appropriate for the federal government to work with the banks to start getting the banks helping these homeowners and allowing them to start refinancing their homes. These are folks that don't want to get out of what they're doing. They want to do the right thing, but they just need some help right now.
Congressman Lungren, quickly on the foreclosure issue.
Well, a couple of things. Number one, for some people who've been foreclosed upon or had short sales, the amount of forgiveness that they have is taxable under the law. We've had exception to that for the last 3 years. That's going to expire. I have the major piece of legislation on the Republican side to make sure that that does not occur, number one. Number two, with respect to first-time home buyers in our own area, I've been told by realtors in our area and first-time home buyers that they have not had the opportunity to purchase houses because investors have come in and taken those out from under them. While it's completely legal, you wonder whether there's anything that can be done on that regard. And then third, I would just say there are any number of people, constituents of my district, with whom we have personally helped in their quest to have the banks follow the law and to look at their circumstances to see whether, in fact, they can be refinanced. So I do think that there is a place for government to play in that.
What could you do about the investors coming in? Any ideas?
No, I don't know, except maybe exposing the fact that this is really undercutting home. I've had realtors tell me that they've had folks who qualify, and they've had to make applications on as many as 19 homes, and then investors come in and take them out from under them. I don't know if there's anything you can do legally about that, but I just think that maybe we ought to surface that question and ask, in fact, if that's in the best interest of the people of our area.
Marion, I think we can work with the banks for those first-time home buyers, those folks that want to get in homes, especially veterans. We should be able to work with those individuals to get them access to the loans so they can buy the homes that they need.
Let's go briefly here to another question as we're coming to the home stretch here of this debate. Dan Lungren, Dan Smith, question.
Congressman Lungren, actually both of you, I'd like to ask this question to both of you. And Congressman Lungren, you can go first. Can you identify for us the most dangerous interest in Washington? Tell me, in your view, which group just has too much influence on the goings-on at the Capitol?
Well, I don't think you can talk about any particular group that has to. I mean, what do you want to do? You want to say that people don't have a right to petition their grievances to the Congress? You want to, as this administration has done, gone after some people when they criticize them? The Gallup poll comes out, the Gallup organization comes out with a poll that shows the president behind, and immediately they're attacked by the executive branch. I don't put people in those categories. I think it's unfair to talk about bringing the majesty of the federal government down on someone who is trying to present their case. It doesn't matter whether they're the wealthiest or they're the poorest. They have a right to do it. What does make a difference is the transparency in terms of lobbying, making sure that everyone knows when it's done, how it's done, under what circumstances it's done, and then let the people decide. We ought to understand the First Amendment is based on the proposition that the more that is said by more people of all stations of life, the better it is. You meet a lie with the truth. You meet some misguided notion with a better notion. This idea that somehow the federal government's got to tell us, oh, we think you shouldn't be talking so much. We think you are a favored operation and you're a disfavored operation. I don't want the government to be involved in that sort of thing. So, frankly, I wouldn't even answer your question because it would suggest that I, as a member of Congress, are going to punish someone.
So there's nothing wrong in Washington, Congressman. That's what you're saying.
I didn't say that at all. I didn't say that at all. But you want me to point out those that are the good guys and those that are the bad guys. The fact of the matter is, the rough and tumble of politics and government allows people to say what they have to say and then let the people decide.
Well, let's let your opponent, Dr. Bera, say what he has to say for 60 seconds.
I think the biggest corrosive influence right now in Washington is the Citizens United ruling, the unleashing of millions of dollars from, that is going to corrupt our democracy, the unleashing of corporations. I'm glad to hear the congressman say he wants to see transparency. We should know who is donating to these campaigns, who is funneling these millions of dollars into races. We're going to see these ads out here. That is going to undermine our democracy, and that truly is, in my mind, something that we've got to address. We can do it. There's legislation, the Disclose Act, which does suggest how we move forward so we at least know who's donating to these ads. I think that's a step in the right direction, Congressman. I think you should push that forward. It's in your committee.
Both gentlemen, we're short on time. Before closing statements, I'm going to ask you a very quick question I'd like you to answer in 30 seconds, if you could. And that is, as you may know, California has a plan for a high-speed rail train system from San Francisco to LA, maybe one day to Sacramento. It requires congressional money. Dr. Bera, would you fund that program? 30 seconds.
I would not fund that program right now. I would invest that money in infrastructure. For our region, that would be the levees, that would be keeping our families safe. But now's not the time for that investment to take place.
And Congressman Lungren, I think we may have agreement here, or am I?
Well, wait a minute. When we had what was supposed to be a debate on national or on state public radio 2 years ago, you were for it, and you criticized me for not being for that very program that now you're against. So I guess you were for it before you're against it, and maybe later on you'll be for it again. As far as the Disclose
That
Act
might
is
make a nice
concerned,
TV ad, huh?
as far as I'm concerned, you had your time.
Very brief, please. Very brief. It was a 30-second answer, Congressman. Please.
Interrupt him.
Okay, well, we're coming close in closing statements.
Disclose Act had disparate treatment of different groups. There were favored groups and there were disfavored groups. That's where the government goes and does what I believe is against the spirit as well as the letter of the First Amendment.
I know you want to say it, but you better say it.
I'll say it quickly.
Thank you.
You know, the voters approved the bonds for high-speed rail. Now is not the time to be investing those monies when we're facing massive debt.
Okay, very good. We've had a spirited debate here among the two candidates, and now they have the opportunity to issue closing statements here in the 7th Congressional District debate. By the order of the coin toss, Dr. Bera, you have the first closing statement today.
Again, I want to thank the moderators. I want to thank those joining us on television and listening on broadcast. 4 years ago, we faced an unprecedented economic crisis that took us into the Great Recession. Today, we face a level of political dysfunction that threatens to take us right back there. Now, you've heard two different visions. Congressman Lungren, who first went to Congress in 1978, he is part of what got us into this mess. He puts forth those same policies that got us into this mess. He's taken hundreds of thousands of dollars from Wall Street, big oil companies. Who do you think he's going to work for? He's voted on a budget twice that would add over $3 trillion to a debt that is crushing our kids. Now, I'm a doctor. The oath I took was to put my patients first. The pledge I make is we have to rebuild America by rebuilding a middle class. We have to make sure every child has that American dream that I'm a product of. Here's my promise to you. I pledge not to take any salary until unemployment in Sacramento is below 5%. I pledge not to take a pension until we've secured Social Security and Medicare for the next generation and our seniors. And I will co-sponsor the bipartisan no budget, no pay legislation that says if Congress doesn't do its job and pass a responsible budget, they don't get paid. Now that's my pledge to you. By putting people first, we can restore the American dream. I would be honored to have your support and vote on November 6th. Thank you.
Democrat Ami Bera, candidate for Congressman of the 7th District, thank you for your closing statement. And now we move to the closing statement of the incumbent in this race, Republican Dan Lungren.
We face serious challenges in this country. That's why I am in Congress, to face those challenges. I have voted for budgets. I've put my name on the line with respect to what needs to be done in order to put this country back on a fiscal path. My opponent's party and those who support my opponent disagree. They want us to continue on the path of more spending and more taxation. If you actually listen to what my opponent says, he's for the status quo on steroids. I am opposing that. I am working against that. But I'm not just working against it. I have a vision of the future of America that comes out of the promise of America. The idea that you can be the best that you possibly can be with God's talents, not encumbered by a government that tells you they know better. Not a government answers all situation where jobs are created by the federal government, where every answer is given to you, where every obligation is imposed on you, but rather in a country that's in the spirit of America, the spirit of the foundation of America, that understood that a limited government is the best government, that a limited but robust government does not interfere with the people. I have faith in the people. I've always had faith in the people. And I think that I have an obligation and you have an obligation to give to our children and our grandchildren the same greatness in America that our parents gave us.
Dan Lungren, thank you for your closing statement. I want to thank both candidates here very much for this. I think we've had a good spirited debate. We've talked about a lot of issues, and certainly there are a lot of issues facing the voters as they go to the polls this year. I want to thank everyone involved in this debate, our media partners here, Dan Smith from the Sacramento Bee, Marianne Russ from Capital Public Radio and all the folks at the three news organizations. I want to tell you also, too, that you can continue to find information on this election season online through the time at all three news organizations at news10.net, at capradio.org, and at sacb.com. And, of course, the most important thing for you, those folks here in the 7th Congressional District, is to get out and vote. Election day is on November 6th. Your vote does matter. Thank you again. I'm John Myers from News 10, and thank you for watching, and thanks to our candidates.